French Republic finally greeted the 19th century with a true ruler upon whom the great hopes of the entire French nation were placed. The 30-year-old consul faced incredibly complex tasks requiring immense effort. He had to recreate the state administration almost entirely from scratch, restore finances without any external loans, and end the Second Coalition, whose armies loomed at the Republic's borders. The French could rely only on their own strength. Foreign powers knew well that the situation in the depleted France was unstable, which gave them confidence in the possibility of an easy victory. Only a firm and wise government capable of uniting the nation and inspiring minds could save the Republic. Fortunately, France's moral strength was far from exhausted. Favorable circumstances played into this extraordinary man's hands. On the side of the first consul were both his genius and life itself. Bonaparte's first order of business was to fire the army of inept officials, which had grown unprecedentedly during the Directory time. Only people of talent and a genuine desire to serve the Republic were admitted into state administration from now on. During these first and most difficult months, Bonaparte surrounded himself with experienced statesmen, including the notable legislator Cambacérès, financiers Lebrun and Goudin, and economist Roederer. Scholars were also actively involved in the administration. Of all the qualities that influenced the first consul's choices, the most significant was strict honesty, and fairness demands that we say he rarely made mistakes in this regard. All power was concentrated in the hands of the first consul. The legislative power was now divided into three assemblies: the conservative Senate, the tribunate, and the legislative corps. The state council prepared the draft laws, usually chaired by the first consul. The Ministry of War was headed by Bonaparte's loyal companion and indispensable chief of staff, Berthier. His remarkable attentiveness and meticulousness helped quickly bring order to the chaos reigning in the Ministry of War at that time. General Moreau was appointed to command the Army of the Rhine. Massena led the Italian front. General Augereau, who initially did not support Bonaparte during the 18 Brumaire, was assigned to command the Batavian army. Bernadotte, who had also opposed the 18 Brumaire, took the position of state councillor and commanded the forces in western France. By taking such steps, the first consul sought to set an example of putting political disputes to rest. The position of Minister of Police remained with Fouché. Talleyrand headed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One of the ongoing concerns troubling the government was aiding the troops stranded in Egypt. Soldiers, the consuls of the French Republic, often turn their attention to the Army of the East. France acknowledges the full impact of your conquests on the restoration of its trade and world civilization. The eyes of all Europe are upon you, and in spirit I am often with you. Whatever situation war may place you in, remain soldiers of Rivoli and Aboukir, and you will be invincible. However, any military action required treasury funds, and the finances were in a catastrophic state. Perhaps the most challenging task for the new government was arranging finances, as there wasn't even enough money for basic expenses, let alone for war with the coalition. Would you believe me if I told you that on the second day of his consulship, Bonaparte wanted to send a courier to the commander of the Italian army, but the treasury could not find even 1,200 francs for that expense? In this desperate situation, Bonaparte turned to the leading bankers of Paris and asked for their help. Very quickly, the new government received 12 million francs. However, this only temporarily eased the situation. Thus, extensive work in the financial sector began. One of the government's first decrees abolished the forced loans that had been in effect during the Directory. Instead, a military levy was introduced, and a system of direct taxes was developed. The new tax collection system, though well thought out, could only be effective if enforced with strict honesty. The first consul received this simply. Bonaparte personally began methodically and meticulously reviewing all financial reports from ministers and made corrections, even if it concerned just a few centimes. A significant event for financial centralization was the establishment of the first state bank of France. This happened less than a month after the first consul took office. The following month, a large-scale reform of local administration took place. The law on the division of territory and administration provided for 4 levels of territorial division. New administrative bodies were also created. The government appointed a prefect to head the department. He bore the exclusive responsibility of management. A month later, a law on the judicial organization of France was passed. That speed of reforms required incredible energy and endurance from the government. And the first consul set an example of phenomenal work capacity. He worked 15 hours a day, and more importantly, he inspired his subordinates to work with the same energy and diligence. However, not all his subordinates could physically endure this monstrous workload, and during work meetings, some would fall asleep right at the table from exhaustion. However, this happened to the first consul as well. After working through the night, he also would fall asleep in the middle of a work meeting. In such cases, all the advisors and ministers would quietly leave the room. Once, during the consulate, at one administrative meeting, the Minister of War fell asleep. Several other members barely stayed in their chairs. Wake up, citizens," Bonaparte exclaimed. "It's only 2 in the morning. We have to earn the salaries the French people pay us." In addition to financial and administrative reforms, security issues required urgent attention. Order had to be restored in the Republic, which was threatened on one side by the revolting Vendée and on the other by the Royalists, embittered by the coup and dreaming of repeating the uprising in Toulon. Bonaparte sent his loyal General Lannes to the unstable south of the Republic. With the mere appearance of this officer in Toulouse, all attempts at resistance disappeared and the conspirators calmed down. In the north, the situation was much more serious, though. For 8 years, a civil war had been raging in the Vendée. The first consul, having personally met with the leaders of the uprising, firmly stated that the time had come to reconcile on reasonable terms, or he would exterminate all of them. This statement was backed up by the immediate dispatch of an army of 60,000 men under General Brune to the Vendée. The leaders of the uprising immediately felt the difference between the Directory and the first consul. They faced a choice: peace or a deadly struggle with a large army. Little time was given for deliberation. Simultaneously with this decisive demonstration of force, Bonaparte took the first steps toward reconciliation. The scandalous hostage law, which had caused widespread dissatisfaction, was repealed. This law held the relatives of the Vendéens and Chouans responsible for all actions in the rebellious provinces. The Republic also promised full amnesty and committed to temporarily suspending taxes in the war-ravaged regions. These sensible measures yielded the long-awaited result, and finally, in January 1800, to everyone's joy, a peace agreement was signed, ending the terrible civil war that had lasted 8 years. Bonaparte had been in office for only 2 months, but the results were astonishing. At this time, the main branches of internal governance had been very well organized. Without a doubt, much remained to be done, but the foundation of the new system was laid in the first months of the consulate. The new government's actions sparked hope among the people that this extraordinary man could put an end to the wars that had drained France for 8 years. This was not only a desire, but also a dire necessity. Waging war with an empty treasury and a still unstable internal situation was completely unfeasible. Moreover, the army's dire situation in Egypt added to the Republic's vulnerability. Therefore, peace was of utmost importance to the first consul. Diplomats were sent to the European state capitals. Their task was to explain that the new government of the Republic enjoyed the full support of the French people and sought only peace. This message was particularly well received in Madrid and Berlin. Moreover, after the Battle of Zurich and emerging contradictions with the Austrians, Emperor Paul I of Russia also reconsidered his relations with the French Republic. At the same time, the consul sought to improve relations with more than just the European states. Across the Atlantic, the late 18th century was darkened by the death of George Washington, the first president of the United States of America. As a sign of goodwill and to honor the late president, the first consul ordered a 10-day mourning period to be observed in France. A black crepe was hung on all the Republic's flags. Washington is dead. This great man fought against violence and secured the independence of his homeland. His memory will forever remain precious to the French people, as it will to all free people of the Old and New Worlds. However, not all relations with states could be improved through diplomacy alone. The Austrian armies continued building forces on the borders of France, and the British cabinet was ready to spend enormous sums on war, far exceeding the entire budget of the French Republic. In this situation, Bonaparte made a very wise political move. He decided to address the King of England and the Emperor of Austria directly with public letters. Moreover, these addresses from the first consul were made public so that not only France but the whole world could hear them. Your Majesty, must the war which has ravaged all 4 parts of the world for 8 years last forever? Is there no way to reach an agreement? Is it possible that the 2 most enlightened nations in Europe should sacrifice the fruits of their trade, their internal well-being, and the happiness of their subjects for empty ideas of vain grandeur? How can one fail to realize that the foremost need and greatest glory of nations lies in peace? Your Majesty should see in this letter only my sincere desire to once again contribute to universal reconciliation. On the same day, the first consul also sent a letter to the Austrian emperor calling for peace, but as expected, this did not lead to any result. The first consul was not even granted a direct reply. Instead, he was given a tactless and accusatory note from Lord Grenville addressed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in which it was stated, among other things, that the address did not conform to the established form. The response from Vienna was more respectful but offered no hope for peace either. Having seized Italy, the Austrians were not even ready to consider the terms outlined in the Treaty of Campo Formio signed at the end of the First Italian campaign. These responses to the call for peace were also made known to the citizens of France. Perhaps the only person in Vienna who believed that the war needed to be avoided was Archduke Charles. He persistently warned the emperor of the dangers of war with Napoleon and proposed taking advantage of their favorable position to reach a reasonable agreement with the French Republic. For this stance, the Archduke fell out of favor and was removed from his command of the troops. Thus, war became inevitable, and no matter how much the French wished to avoid it, they could not allow themselves to be humiliated before the English by begging for peace. And then, the first consul issued a proclamation to the nation. Frenchmen, you wished for peace, and your government desired it even more fervently. Our first efforts were aimed at achieving it, but the British government has revealed the secret of its unjust policy. It seeks to dismember France, destroy its trade, or reduce it to the level of a secondary state. To achieve peace, we will need money, weapons, and soldiers. Let everyone hasten to contribute to the common cause. Let the young take up arms, not for the interests of a party, not at the will of tyrants, but to defend what is most precious, the honor of France and the sacred cause of humanity. Young Frenchmen, if you wish to join a glorious cause, if you wish to be in the army that will bring the wars of the revolution to a glorious end, that will establish the independence, freedom, and glory of a great nation, to arms, to arms, to arms.